And my name is Peter Fabish. I'm a co-owner of Conscious Family Law and Mediation. And I want to start out by asking everybody a question, and a question that you can consider. And my question to you is, can your most intimate relationships transform your life? I'm wondering if anybody would have a thought about that, not to share at the moment, but just something to think about. And another question you can ponder is, why are you in relationships? Um, I'm asking these questions to invite you into something that's been happening for me. I got into my 50th decade 5 years ago. I'm halfway through that. And like you all, I went through the year 2020 in the world. And those things both have gotten me thinking about something very particular and actually experiencing it more strongly than I ever had. And that is this: I am not going to be here forever. My lifetime actually has an expiration date. Now, sure, of course, we all know that. Intellectually, we all know we're going to die. But existential philosophers and spiritual teachers tell us that really getting our mortality is actually a portal to living a better life. And why? Well, because knowing that we have only a specific amount of time, a certain amount of time on this planet, and we really actually don't know how long that could be, actually calls us and motivates us to approach our lives much more powerfully and intentionally, and to seek meaning in what we do. It's something I've been pondering, and I imagine maybe some of you are saying, well, hold on a second, I thought this was a class on relationships and these 5 practices that were going to help me have a better relationship. And yes, it is. But I brought up these questions and I bring up this issue of mortality because on a meta level, the 5 practices that I'm going to talk about today ask you to really take your life seriously. What do I mean? I think about life, I do think about meaning, and one of the reasons, rather than just being here and seeing how many widgets I can make or how many things I can acquire, one of the things I think about in terms of why I'm here is to be able to grow in maturity and in my ability to relate to other human beings, to love other human beings, to seek to be of service outside of myself. This is one very broad definition of spiritual practice, in fact, one that is not necessarily religious. But the idea that any practice that helps someone to grow, to become more connected, more in service, more able to love, is, in my book, a spiritual practice. And how this ties into relationship, I am going to tie it in, is that I believe, and I think experience bears it out, that intimate relationship is one of the most powerful spiritual, what have you, if you accept that as a definition of spirituality, spiritual practices that one can engage in. And why is that? Because relationships consistently bring us to our edges. They show us where we have work to do. If you are in a marriage, if you are in an intimate relationship, if you're in a family, I imagine you could very easily agree with me on that your partner, your children, your closest friends, your family show you where your edges are, sometimes on a fairly consistent basis, and sometimes more than we would want. However, being in intimate relationship brings us to our edges and also gives us a context in which to utilize that to grow, and shows us specifically where we can grow. And actually, ultimately, there's a very selfish reason for that. I've been talking a lot about service, but what I have found is when I engage in intimate relationship in this way, and when I use the 5 practices that I'm about to teach you in this way, I end up having a much, much better experience of life. And I can tell you, and I'll share a few stories as we go, my experience of life, as I'm living it today, is worlds away in quality from what it used to be. And I can tell you that practicing these 5 practices are a big part of that. So um, that's what's at stake here. Um, so how do I have any qualification to talk about any of this? A couple of things. I can give you a little bit of background. As we've mentioned, I'm a co-owner of Conscious Family Law and Mediation. That means I'm a family attorney. I'm also, more importantly, I think, in terms of my professional practice, a mediator. I do mediation with couples who are both working on their relationships, as Catherine mentioned, and also couples who are transitioning out of a marriage and often into a co-parenting relationship. Those transitions are intense and also, as I've mentioned here, fit into that category of being an opportunity for a transformative experience, which is something that I bring into my interactions with transitioning clients to the extent that they're ready to hear it. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're just needing to get the logistics done, and I don't push these things, of course. But for people who are open to it, divorce is an opportunity to not only transition out of a marriage, but to face things in a way that can actually change your life for the better and set you up for a better life and better relationships going forward. I'm also a master's level therapist. At one point, I'd been practicing law since I was since 1991. I wasn't in family law, and I'd become quite disenchanted with practicing law at one point and thought I was going to become a therapist. And I went to and got a master's in counseling and did in fact practice as a therapist for some time, but came back to law in meeting my business partner, John Hawley, who was mentioned earlier here. And it's been one of the huge blessings of my life that occurred, because operating this business is a joy, even though we're dealing with people that are in very difficult situations often. In terms of my history, I am also in a second marriage. I have been through what I take people through. I've been both through relationships, which I'm going to talk about, and I've also been through a divorce. And I would say that first marriage was not a successful relationship. And I don't say that because it ended in divorce. I do think that at times divorces happen for legitimate reasons. And in this case, I think that is the case. I don't regret that my first marriage ended. But I was very mature during that first marriage, and I really wasn't able to use the marriage to grow in the ways I'm going to talk about here. I remarried my current wife, Lori Lazar, who I believe is on this call. I can't see you all. In 2011, and we've been married for going on our 10th year. I would say that relationship is successful. It's successful because we have done the work and been doing the work and continue to do the work. And it's a joint effort, but it wasn't always that way. And I can tell you a little story about that. I'm going to share. Lori and I, early on in our relationship, we met a bit late in the potential for fertility game. I was 45 and Lori was 43. And we were trying to get pregnant. And I'm going to take you to a situation. We were sitting in South Africa in a fertility clinic office. And the task we had been given was to choose an embryo to attempt to get pregnant with. And instead, we were sitting on the floor in this office and talking about whether or not we should get divorced. It was a moment. We were both extremely triggered. We were both not seeing a way out. And we were both completely lost in the story that the other person needed to change in some way in order for this relationship to work, and thinking that that was simply not going to happen. We were under a lot of stress. In that moment, a bit of a miracle occurred. And the miracle was we both had an experience of suddenly seeing how we were being in relationship to our families of origin. Lori later shared with me that she was remembering, she was realizing that she was behaving in the way that she had seen her parents behave, and trying to having expectations about how I should be being, and wanting to control me. And I was having an experience of how my father had been, and judging her, and having a story that she wasn't taking care of me sufficiently. And in having that insight, in welcoming what was happening, and that's one of the practices I'm going to be talking about, we both just suddenly had a breakthrough that allowed us to not only end the argument and come together, but to go on with what we were there to do. And almost 10 years later, we're still married very happily. So these practices work. I'm going to tell you a couple logistics really quickly before we launch into the practices. I am going to put my email in the chat box here. There's going to be some handouts that actually Miles, the firm, Cather's firm, is going to be sending to you after this. There's one particular handout everyone will definitely get. There's some other handouts that you can get if you're interested by emailing me. One of them being a document I've put together on how to have difficult conversations. And I could potentially just provide that to everybody as well. But if you also, my wife and I lead workshops that delve into these practices further, and also in developing some other relational practices. And we're putting something like that together right now. So if anyone's interested after this in getting any more information about what we do, also in Conscious Family, as Catherine mentioned, we take people through relationship mediation, and we do conscious family contracts. So if you want any more information about any of that, you can email me at the email in the chat box. If you have any questions during the presentation, put them in the Q&A box, please. And you can't raise your hand because I can't see anybody else. So just put them in the Q&A. I will either answer them, or at some point, I think, hopefully we'll be able to just get people interacting with me directly if people are interested. So launching into the practices, there are 5 of them. But before we get into those specific 5 practices, I promise I will get to them eventually. I want to talk about a couple of overarching practices that apply throughout your use of the 5 practices. And they're powerful, powerful practices. Something I want to say about these and about the 5 practices in general. I've found this to be true of some of the most profound things I've ever come across. And they are that these practices sound very simple in the way in name and in explanation, but they have infinite depth, and you can explore them to very great depths within your relationship. And you're going to find, and I'm going to talk about that as we go through this. They are also called practices for a reason. They are not rules for a relationship. They are not try this once and it's going to make everything different for a relationship. They are practices. They are practices because there are things you have to do over and over again for them to work, and for you to learn how for them to work. And quite often, like any other practice, you might find at first you're not that great at it. And as you continue to work with it, it becomes more deep, more ingrained, and more powerful. So the first practice, overarching practice I want to talk about is there we go, I'm technically proficient, I swear, slowing down. There we go. I needed to press the screen share. Slowing down. That actually had a nice little cool effect of fading in, but I didn't do it before I pressed the screen share. So slowing down is the first practice. It's a powerful, powerful practice for any situation. What it does in slowing down, what I mean is, it usually can be put into effect anytime you're finding yourself in a situation in relationship where things are starting to go off the rails. You're starting to get activated. And slowing down means becoming aware of what is happening in the moment. So becoming mindful, orienting to the present moment, as opposed to being in the future. Quite often, being in the future means thinking about the next thing you're going to say to your partner as they're speaking, and noticing exactly what's happening without any immediate attempt to change it. So noticing what's happening inside you, sensations, emotions, stories you may have going on, things that you feel like you want to say to your partner. And the way what that does is, I want to just mention this this kind of visual is about lid flipping. Our brains as humans have developed over the millennia. We started out with more primitive brains they call the lizard brain. Eventually developed a mammalian layer over the top of the lizard brain. And over that, we developed a cerebral cortex, which is what really makes us human and allows us to engage in complex thought. So that can be visualized through reptilian higher levels of the brain. When one gets triggered by which can often happen with a partner, one finds that the lid can get flipped. And when your lid is flipped, you typically are not able to, the cerebral cortex goes offline. You're not able to engage in higher level thinking. You're more in fight or flight or freeze mode. And the possibility of positive outcomes diminishes rapidly. Slowing down gives you the opportunity to let your lid come down. Because often when one person's lid flips, it tends to flip the other person's lid. And when you got two lids flipped, you don't have a lot of chance of there being a positive interaction. My wife and I, Lori, developed a practice we call Turtle. And so when we notice a conversation seems to be going offline, often one of us will just say, call Turtle. And that means, hey, let's slow this down for just a second. Let's see what's happening here. It's like instant replay. When there's an instant replay of a sports play, and when it happens at full speed, you can't tell what happened. But when you slow things down, you can see exactly what's happening. And it allows you to get back down to this position. The other overarching possibility for the other overarching practice I want to talk about is, do I really want to? Curiosity. Curiosity and slowing down combined together are a game changer. Curiosity is a secret sauce. It is actually, in my view and in my exploration and in much of the research I've done, the secret to maintaining chemistry, fun, and eros being romance, sexual chemistry, and so forth in marriages. People often find in their marriages that eros diminishes over time. And I'm convinced that the primary reason for that is that most people engage in an assumption that they know their partner that they've been with for years backwards and forwards. And their partner really doesn't have any surprises for them. Oh, I know what so-and-so thing is going to say if I say that. I know what they're going to think if I say that. This is the ultimate killer of eros, to believe that one knows everything about one's partner. And honestly, what I've engaged in over time and learned to do, it's been a real game changer in my marriage, is to actually engage in fantasy and imagination around this idea, which turns out to be a reality, that I actually do not know this person across from me, Lori Lazar, who I've known for over 10 years. And the fact of the matter is, we are all extremely deep beings, and we are always in constant change. Humans who are frozen and without change are unhealthy humans. So being able to take on the attitude that I do not know what is necessarily going on for my partner is not only very powerful for eros, but if one slows down and engages in curiosity, it is an extremely powerful practice to interrupt interactions that are going off the rails. It disarms almost any situation to slow down and get curious. And I'm going to talk more about that in the context of the 5 practices. So now I am going to launch into the 5 practices. And again, these are practices. They are things that you engage in repeatedly over and over again over time for a lifetime. And one tends to get better at them over time. And yes, indeed, Catherine, I agree. This is helpful for any relationship. I'm mostly talking about the context of intimate relationship, but it is helpful for any relationship. So These are practices. They are deep. They are powerful. And the first one I want to talk about is welcome everything. So, welcome everything. Sounds like a tall order. Why would I ever want to welcome things that absolutely should not be welcomed? Terrible things, bad things, things that make me uncomfortable. Well, welcome everything is an attitude toward life that has been espoused actually by teachers throughout history. Some of the greatest religious and spiritual teachers talk about this attitude of welcoming what is. And I want to, it's an opportunity really to take a step towards giving up being at war with yourself and with the world. Because welcoming everything involves welcoming what is going on inside of yourself, and it involves welcoming what's going on inside your partner and what is occurring in the relationship at any given time. And frankly, what I can tell you is it's a welcoming, it may even sound trite, but it is one of the most profound energies you can bring into your existence. And I promise you that if you practice it on a regular basis, you will find that it can change your life. It makes life better. Now, I want to contrast this with something I like to call the forcing current. It's actually not a term that I coined. I got it from a different teaching. But you may notice most people engage in some form of the forcing current. And it's really largely an internal experience. It can be expressed externally through aggressive or passive aggressive means of trying to change people or situations. But it actually, it's largely an internal experience of just resisting and being in tension and being against whatever is happening and wanting to try to force the world, to force other people to change in ways that we want them to change. And by the way, I'm not going to be suggesting here that you should never try to affect change in the world. That is not what I'm talking about with welcoming everything, and I'll get to that. But if you may notice in many situations, I certainly did with myself, that I went through a lot of life with a lot of internal tension, thinking with this just sort of, and when I finally acknowledged it to be, was just this way of I realized that it was an irrational sort of childish belief inside of myself that I could actually change other people and change the world just by being resentful enough about it, and holding all this tension in my body. And in welcoming and bringing a welcoming energy to things, I can help to shift that and to let that go. It uses up a lot of energy that can be more productively used. It feels terrible. And frankly, it has very little effect in the world other than to diminish my well-being and to hurt my health. So welcoming everything is a welcoming attitude, a welcoming energy. It's slowing down. It's becoming present. It's noticing what's happening inside yourself and being willing to be with it and welcome it as it is. Whether it's discomfort, fear, breakdown, disconnection, anxiety, nervousness, anything, even joy, positive things as well. It's an attitude of not denying what is there, but saying you're welcoming it to be there. It certainly does not mean tolerating things that are that require a boundary. You wouldn't welcome somebody to be abusive to you, to treat you dishonestly. But it does mean, even in those situations, welcoming the fact that you have put yourself, that you are in that situation, and welcoming whatever is occurring inside of you, and slowing down enough, even welcoming the fact that you're with somebody who is doing things that you don't approve of, and giving yourself the space to actually have choices, as opposed to simply being triggered, in which choices tend to disappear, as we talked about earlier. It helps you to set healthier boundaries, to see things better. So I want to tell you another little story about welcoming everything. And this is something that actually happened to me recently. I was on a little brief vacation with my wife. We went to an Airbnb together in Carbondale. And I have been since I've been kind of opening up to some things and stopped engaging in ways that I'd been sort of numbing myself out over the years, I've been noticing some things come up from my past. I had a bit of a traumatic childhood. I had a mom who committed suicide and sort of broke up our family, and had a lot of difficult things happen over those years back when I was 11. And I didn't really have an opportunity to grieve any of that because there wasn't a space. There really wasn't space for that in my family. We didn't talk about it, and so I'm finding here at 55 that I'm still, those things are still alive in me. And in this time in Carbondale, when we were at this Airbnb, I found myself one night just laying there and just suddenly feeling I was overcome with this incredible discomfort. And at first, all I wanted to do was get away from it. I was like, well, what can I do? Should I go for a run? Should I do some push-ups? Should I, what can I do to make this stop? And instead, I remembered welcoming everything, and I laid down, and I actually sat, and I went inside myself, and I paid attention to where this was in my body, and I was experiencing it as this sort of blob of mucky discomfort that was in the middle of my body. And I was stuck right to the surface of it. It was like I was it. And as I brought this welcoming energy in, it was like this was the thing, and I suddenly popped out. So it was here, and I was suddenly here. And it was still there, and I was still feeling it, but I had some distance and I had some space around it. And with that space, it opened up and dissolved. And I suddenly was able to feel a sense of a combination of joy and grief over my mom's death. And I was able to experience some tears and some opening. And frankly, it changed my whole experience of the vacation, actually, after that. It was this massively opening experience for me. And I still am feeling the effects of it today. That's kind of a larger experience of it, but welcoming everything can be used in any kind of interaction in your life. So I want to actually invite everybody to do an exercise now, if people are open to it. It's kind of harder here because I'm used to being able to see people when I do this, but I'm going to ask anybody who wants to participate in this exercise can do it. And if not, you can just sit and listen. But I'm going to invite anybody who'd like to go ahead and close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, just notice what's here for you now. Whatever sensations you might be feeling, or stories, feelings, just notice it without judgment. And whenever you're ready, I want you to call up a person or a situation that you are currently feeling in resistance to. Someone's doing something you don't want. Someone's not doing something you want them to do. Or some situation at work or at home. Call that into your mind's eye. And when you've done that, notice what it's like. What does it feel like to have that experience in your imagination, this person or this situation? What kind of feelings does it bring up? Sensations, emotions, stories? What does it feel like to be in resistance to this person or situation? And anything you notice, it can be the smallest thing. And when you're ready, try bringing in an attitude of welcoming. Actually welcome whatever it is that you're imagining without trying to change it. Just welcome it. What would it be like to welcome this thing or this person? could that change how you relate to it or what choices you have? Feel what that feels like. And when you're ready, you can come out of that. You can slowly open your eyes, come back to the room, and notice if that changed anything about how that occurs for you. And this would actually be a situation here where I would typically ask people to share if they had any experience with that. I don't know if we can do that with this platform here. But if you'd like, you can journal about anything that may have occurred for you there, or we could share about it at the end. So, okay. Okay, so if anybody does want to share at any point about this or any other situation or anything else that comes, you can raise your hand and we can allow people to share if they'd like. So let us know. And if we don't have anything for that for now, we can talk about this at the end if you'd like. I can move on to the second practice of the 5 practices. And that practice is assume nothing. So assuming nothing sounds like, again, a tall order. And in fact, it is an impossible order. Assuming nothing is a way of speaking. It's an extreme statement that is meant to elicit an approach, because assumption is actually something that we have to do to function in the world. We make assumptions about what's going to happen when we press the brake in our car, and we rely on past experiences to give us information about what is happening in the present moment. So assuming nothing is actually impossible. But what is really meant by this practice is more noticing our assumptions. So it starts with noticing when you're making an assumption about another person or a situation. Then questioning your assumptions. Being willing to, rather than just be treating the assumption as if it is an absolute truth, but questioning it. And thirdly, being willing to check your assumptions out with whoever you are making the assumption about. So, and in the striving to assume nothing, in taking on that as a practice, something interesting occurs. Our curiosity is unleashed, and we come into relationship with what is here now, and we notice that we are having an assumption, and we question it. It has a little to do with the left brain and the right brain. Our left brain, both of which are extremely important in our functioning in the world. People tend to spend a lot of time in our culture in their left brain, and your left brain very powerfully, logically and linearly takes what has happened in the past, makes sense of it, and uses that information and that sense making to interpret what's happening in the present. And so when you're go upstairs to take a nap at the end of the day, if you're home and your partner comes home and walks in the room and says, "Have you been in bed all day?" Your left brain goes online and makes up a story about what your partner means by asking you if you've been in bed all day. What assuming nothing does in going in and questioning and getting curious and checking things out is it brings your right brain online too. It allows you to bring more balance between the two. And checking out the assumption, you can often find out that our assumptions are incorrect. When your partner walked in and said, "Have you been in bed all day?" they might have been implying that you seem like, are you really that lazy that you've been laying around all day when I've been out working hard? Or they may have wondered if you're actually sick and you need a glass of water, or you need to have some care brought to you. And in checking out the assumption that you might make around what your partner has asked you, you can have opportunities for more choice. The way I like to think about it is the first one who gets to curiosity wins in any given situation in your relationship. And if you're trying these practices out for the first time, you can even keep score on who, in all situations, who gets to curiosity first and breaks out of something that's occurring. I have an exercise for this practice as well, but I think I'm going to hold off on that one. I think what I'm going to do is go through all of the practices, some of the other practices first, and then circle back around to that. So assuming nothing, again, extremely powerful practice of noticing where you were making assumptions about your partner and how you can question them. The next practice I want to talk about is, that's my last slide, I forgot to show. Reveal your experience. Practice number 3. What do we mean by reveal your experience? Revealing your experience is the doorway to connection. Oops, I actually chose the wrong thing for that last one. Catherine was telling me now that I showed you my desktop. Sorry about that. I meant to show you my slide that says reveal your experience. It is the doorway to connection. Without revealing what is happening for you, you cannot be in relationship with another person. And it's intuitively obvious to say that, but people so often, and I would put myself in that boat very much so, will hesitate to reveal their experience to their partner, their children, their friends. And oftentimes, it is because when, I'll just speak for myself, I often didn't do it in the context of my marriage, for example, and in many other relationships, frankly, because I was afraid of what would happen. I didn't want to upset the other person, or I thought that they wouldn't be open to what I was going to say. But in fact, what it turns out is that when one gets empowered to reveal one's experience, and especially when one sets a context, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, of revealing experience within a relationship, it becomes a great gift to reveal one's experience with another person when it is happening. So the first part of revealing one's experience, of course, is to become aware of your experience. Many of us may also have been in families where our experiences, our thoughts, our feelings were not elicited or honored or listened to. And if you've come from a family like that, then you may have done like myself, which is to get into a space where you actually kind of lose touch with what your experience is. And I have gone through a process over recent years of really learning how to slow down and become in touch with what my experience is in a given moment, which again gives me choices, especially when I bring in the other practices, including the ones I have yet to talk about. I mentioned I was going to talk about setting context in the relationship. Setting context is one of the most powerful things you can do. It is a part of authentic relating. We set context all the time. We live in contexts. Most contexts that we live in are implied, or they're implicit or covert. There's an implicit context here in this call that I am leading the call, that I'm the one that's the main teacher. We don't have everybody trying to jump in and take over and lead the class. I wore a shirt to this presentation. There's an implicit context that I would come dressed, although I may or may not have pants on. It's for you to guess and to never know. But we have implicit context all the time. And the thing about implicit context is they can often lead to conflict when implicit contexts come into conflict. And that quite often happens in relationships where people each have an implicit and a covert context, but they've not expressed it openly. And so expressing context, being explicit about context, is a very powerful relational tool. And so in my marriage with Lori, we have a context of when one of us has something we call a withhold, a situation where something's been going on and we want to talk about it, but we're concerned that if we do it in an unskillful way, it might just trigger the other person. It might get defensive. We ask to set a context for a conversation. Lori, I want to reveal something to you. The reason I want to do it is because I love you and I love being in this marriage and I want to have a powerful marriage and clear this. I want to reveal this to you to give you a certain understanding of what's going on for me and to also to get your world around what's happening with this thing. Are you enrolled in that? And if she says yes, we sit down and we set a context. Sometimes if it seems like it's going to be a really challenging thing, we slow things down by asking that the context be that I get to share first and she actually repeats back to me what I've said in doable chunks until I'm finished expressing what I'm going to express. And then she would have the opportunity after that to share impact, to reveal her experience of what's happening. And then we would go back and forth in that manner. And Lori and I have had very, very powerful conversations around that have allowed us to have breakthroughs around patterns that were occurring and help to eliminate those patterns and give us more closeness. So one general context that I highly recommend for relationship, as much as you can do it, is to prioritize connection over content. And so again, that means slowing down rather than trying to be right, finding ways to stay in connection and then get across what it is you need to get across. And another really Jedi technique in this realm is to stop when things appear to be going off the rails. If you're having a conversation and you start to get heated and it seems like you're about to get into an argument, it's for one or the other person to stop, slow down, or use turtle or whatever word you want to use, if that seems silly to you, and name what's happening for you personally in the moment. So Lori and I could be having a discussion and it starts to get heated and I can say, hold on, can I just say, I just want to reveal, I'm noticing my heart rate's going up. I'm starting to get really tense in my neck and my shoulders. I think I'm starting to resent what's happening, and it's really unpleasant. I'm not liking it. I just wanted to name that's happening for me, and that can just alone slow things down enough that you can get back on track to being able to have a conversation with a more useful context where you're not just arguing with each other and trying to get your words in while the other person's trying to speak. So the question here for everyone to contemplate on this practice is, what is it that block you from revealing your experience in your relationship? Some people are very good at it. Some people almost seem too good at it. I don't think you can be too good at it, but most people struggle, at least in certain contexts, in revealing what's happening for them. And often it can be because of some of the things that I've mentioned. Fear of repercussions, fear of damaging the relationship. And so I'm going to ask everybody to think about, what is it? What are some of the things that block you from revealing your experience in the moment? And how can you work to overcome those? And I'm going to offer, after the webinar, to anybody who wants it, some handouts on how to engage in contexts that allow you to more skillfully reveal your experience to one another as a couple. So, deep breath. Gone through 3 of the practices, round number 4. The 4th practice of authentic relating is own your experience. Own your experience. Own your experience is, in my personal experience of life, one of the most powerful practices any human being can engage in. For me, practicing owning my experience has literally changed my life massively for the better. What do I mean by that? Well, owning your experience breaks what I think is one of the primary addictions that human beings engage in. And you can see it really playing out right now in the world with all the polarization and all the stuff going on in social media. And that addiction is blaming things outside of oneself for one's personal experience of life. Blaming the world, other people, events, society, presidents, so on, for one's personal experience leads to resentment. Resentments lead to other addictions, and addictions in our culture are rampant, not just drugs and alcohol, but addictions to internet, social media, gambling, pornography, work, you name it. And by owning your experience, you can begin to step out of that addiction. I can tell you from a personal standpoint, as I mentioned, I came from some trauma as a child. I walked through a lot of my life in a sort of framework of being a victim. And I experienced my life often as just being unhappy because of things that were outside of my control, how other people were behaving, how other people were thinking, how the world was. And shifting to a general attitude of owning my own experience, which just means whatever is happening inside of me is mine and mine alone to work with. And what is happening outside of me is largely out of my control, has really changed my life. And it doesn't mean that I don't try to affect positive change. Engaging in these 5 practices is a very conscious way of seeking to affect change in your relationships and in the world. But it's not a forcing. I have to start by owning what's happening for me. And the way that shows up in an actual conversation, in a relationship, is crucially in the language that you use. And what I want to say about using the language of owning your experience is to make indisputable statements. What is an indisputable statement? An indisputable statement is a statement about your own experience. If I say to my partner, you're being selfish, that is not indisputable. My partner could have all kinds of arguments for why she thinks she's not being selfish or is not selfish. But if I say, when you just go out and plan something for the two of us, or for the two of us, without first talking to me and finding out what I've got going on and taking into consideration my needs, I notice that I feel disregarded, I feel resentful, and it has me feeling more distant in the moment. That's an indisputable statement. My partner can't argue with that because that is my experience. And the big difference that makes in the context of a conversation is it's a heck of a lot less likely to elicit defensiveness. If I tell my partner she's being selfish or she is selfish, um, I can bet that it's most likely going to result in a defensive reaction. A wall is going to go up, the lid's going to flip. We're not going to have a productive conversation. But if I reveal to her and own what's happening for me, that allows possibility for conversation, including her disagreeing or noting that there are other possible ways I could be experiencing the situation. You know, and we can talk about those, but that, you know, but it's still my experience, and therefore it is indisputable that it is what I am having. It allows, though, us to have choice, to have possibilities. It slows things down. And it allows me to deal with the one thing that I can deal with, which is my own experience. I cannot, as I mentioned, necessarily affect change in my partner or in anyone else. But I can look at what's happening for me and wonder, are there ways that I could embrace this situation differently? Are there ways that I could take care of myself? Are there ways I could set up boundaries, or are there ways I could ask for what I need? But it starts with owning my experience, because if I start out by blaming, by making statements about my partner when I want to ask for something, I'm highly unlikely to get it. So owning my experience, I've found selfishly to be something that I can do to make my life way better and to make it much more likely that I'm going to get what I want. And it's greatly empowering. I'll tell you one other thing about myself. I spent a long time in my life engaging in a nice guy racket. I tended to come across as the guy who was going to take care of everybody else and meet their needs and not express what I needed. And the thing about a nice guy racket is people doing nice guy rackets aren't actually all that nice. Inside, while I was trying to take care of everybody else, and again, I don't beat myself up for this. This was a strategy I developed as a kid in a very chaotic family, and my solution to that was to try to manage what was happening for everybody else and keep everybody happy, especially the adults. But I carried that into adulthood when it was certainly no longer an effective strategy. Getting to the point where I could turn around and engage in these practices, including owning my experience, and I'm going to talk about honor self and honor other in a minute too, allowed me to kick that whole nice guy thing to the curb. And what I found was, it doesn't mean that I'm no longer nice. I can be nice, but it means that I'm actually being an adult. I'm being a man. I am asking for what I need. I'm able to talk about these things. And what I've found, yeah, I think a lot of people might be familiar with that racket. And what I've found since I've started to work with that is that actually I get a lot better reactions out of people than I used to. Instead of trying to take care of them, I do still take care of people. I'm in service all the time. My job involves service, and I do a lot to take care of people. But I also take care of myself, and I ask for what I need, and I express what's happening to me, for me. And I find that what that does is it allows people to trust me. And if people trust me, they're a lot more likely to be able to be helped by me and to be in good relationship with me. If I'm not engaging in those practices, if I'm not owning my experience, if I'm not asking for what I need, they may not know it, but there's going to be an underlying distrust of who I am. And that's certainly what I found in my relationships when I was engaging in the nice guy racket. And I also found myself, my resentments came out in a lot of sideways ways. And those didn't help my relationships either. So, owning your experience, a very, very powerful practice in authentic relating and in life. The last of the 5 practices that I want to talk about today, and then give it an opportunity for some questions and answers, is honor self and honor other. Again, sounds Yeah. Um, Sounds honor self, honor others. Sounds simple again, broad. What the heck does that mean? Well, um, there's a number of things we mean by honoring self and honor other. Most people have some kind of just sort of default framework around how they relate to the world in terms of how much they honor themselves and honor others. Some tend to be more caretakers. There's different personality types. There's different frameworks for that, like the Enneagram. Enneagram 2s tend to be, or maybe it's 3s, I can't remember, that tend to be more caretakers, and then others, narcissistic personality types tend to be more self-centered. Um, so, but even in authentic relating, part of what we want to encourage people to do in these 5 practices is to find a balance between honoring self and honoring other. And what do we mean by each of these? Honoring self includes, again, what I had just been recently talking about. And Rick, I really actually appreciate what you said there about the used car salesman and all of that, the nice guy. It really is true. When you don't honor yourself, when you are not being honest with the other person and revealing and vulnerable. Vulnerability, as many of you may have heard from such luminaries as Brene Brown, is one of the greatest superpowers in the world. It takes enormous courage to be vulnerable, and just for many of us, just being clear and being open about what we need and honoring ourselves is vulnerable. It takes courage. But it means taking care of yourself physically. It means taking care of yourself spiritually. It means if you're someone who needs alone time, taking that time for yourself, staying hydrated, staying fed. It means setting healthy boundaries. There's one of the most powerful books I ever read, was written by a local luminary we have right here in Boulder, called The Power of a Positive No. It's a book by William Ury. He's a world famous mediator, a guy I respect for a lot of reasons, including the work he does. Highly recommended. He's also the guy that wrote Getting to Yes. But The Power of a Positive No, the basic premises of a power of a positive no is when you say no to something in a positive way, you are actually saying yes to something else that's important to you. Because every time we say yes to something that we don't actually feel enrolled in, we are taking up space that could otherwise be used for things that we actually are enrolled in ways that we could actually be in more powerful service. And so, so the power of positive no is being clear about, well, what is it I'm saying yes to? And therefore, what do I need to say no to in order to say yes to the thing that I really want? And if I say, and many, many examples of this, if I'm saying no to my partner speaking to me in a disrespectful way, I am saying it is because I want to say yes to us having a more connected, more respectful relationship. If I say no to someone asking me to do something, it's often because I'm saying yes to something else that would be more powerful, better, more desirable for me to be doing. So it's very personal how one honors oneself, but there's infinite depth to the ways you can honor yourself. Honoring other, I think the most powerful way I want to talk about honoring other, the one that I want to just mention here among many others, that was very counterintuitive to me at first, was one of the greatest ways you can honor other people is to allow them to have their own experience, including their own opinions and judgments of me. One of the big forcing currents I carried through the world for a long time was wanting to force everybody to have a good opinion of me. I want everybody to like me. I want everybody to think I was great. And frankly, and I would try to force that to happen. And if I found out that somebody had a bad opinion of me, I'd try to force them to change it, either by doing so directly and overtly, or by covertly cutting them off, or distancing myself from them, or maybe even having some bad opinion about them. Okay, so honoring if I can honor others by allowing them to have whatever opinions they have of me, I am so much empowered by that. First of all, I'm not walking around expending a lot of energy worrying about what other people think of me. And frankly, if I'm in that posture, I'm a lot more likely to get the kind of respect that I want. It doesn't mean that I don't care what people think. There's a nuance between that. One can go around saying, well, I don't care what people think. I'm going to just do whatever the heck I want. That's not what this is. I do respect showing up in the world in a way that is respectful of others and caring of others. But if someone wants or needs to make up something about me that I would prefer they thought differently, that's none of my business. It's actually none of my business. And I can honor them by allowing them to have that opinion. It doesn't mean I can't talk to them about it, maybe even try to talk them out of it in a respectful way. But I'm going to start by honoring where they are. And there's a general tendency in relationships, especially in intimate relationships, to really try to have this sense that you have the right to try to control and alter the other person. And often that exists on a covert level. Just feeling this feeling of resentment that the other person's not being the way you want them to, and just going on and on in your head about, oh, if I could be happy, if only my partner were less this or more that. And then engaging in this forcing current in that way. By engaging in all of these practices, including honoring my partner, starting with an attitude of welcoming, of assuming nothing, of honoring their right to be the way they are, then I have an opening, a doorway, a portal to actually come in connection with this person and potentially shift the dynamic of the relationship in ways that are positive. If I'm not starting out with that honoring attitude of honoring myself and honoring them, it's a lot less likely to happen. It's an internal shift that can go very, very, very deep. And it can change your whole experience of life. Getting curious is a very powerful way to honor others. And we talked about curiosity. If instead of immediately getting triggered and angry about something my partner's doing, I get curious. I'm wondering why you seem to be angry right now. I'm wondering why you went storming through the room without saying anything to me. I'm curious. It's an honoring. Welcoming everything and assuming nothing. Again, honoring. It turns out that all ways of honoring are an endless feedback loop of honoring yourself and honoring the other. If I am worrying about what people's judgments are of me and thinking of me, I'm uptight, I'm unhappy. If I'm honoring people's right to have negative opinions of me, I'm honoring them by giving them the freedom to do it, and I'm honoring myself by not getting all caught up in it. If I'm asking for time for myself in my relationship, even though I think I'm going to come in and my wife's going to want to talk about some logistical thing that needs to be done, and I need to tell her, no, actually, I'm really tired. Can we talk about that later? I'm honoring myself by asking for what I need, and I'm honoring my partner by giving her the positive assumption that she can handle me asking for what I want. And if I do that in an authentic way, she's much more likely to be able to do that. And she might not. You know, she might say, hey, no, you never give me time to talk about this stuff. But what I've found is that as I have honored myself in this way and honored her in this way, it's really shifted how things go. I used to get a lot of that. No, it's never time to talk about this stuff. That really doesn't happen anymore. And I add in, of course, I will also honor her by saying, can we set another time to talk about this? So that's being respectful of her need to have this discussion. But we really don't have those arguments anymore. And a lot of that had to do with me shifting the internal dialogue of honoring myself and honoring her and not going into resentment over what I was assuming she was doing, which seemed to be dishonoring of my need for time. So all of these practices are examples of honoring yourself and honoring other. So, wow, I have been talking a lot and continuously for an hour and 40 minutes, or an hour and I don't know how long it's been. It's been over an hour. So it's an hour and 10 minutes. So I really would love to open the floor to any questions people have to talk about any of these practices. We can, if people are open for it, we could engage in some additional activities, or we could even wrap up the class for the day. But we have a little bit more time. Um, and so I'd like at this moment to just open up the floor for any questions. And I see there is a question in the Q&A. Okay, I asked a question about the 3 parts of the brain using hand going through that. Is it the cortex flipping? Please go over the 3 parts of brain using hand, also flipping lid, cortex is flipping, question mark. Yes, that is what's going on. So the 3 parts of the brain, we're talking about there, my hand only has 2 parts here, but we're looking at the primitive, more primitive parts of your brain, your lizard brain, your amygdala, the parts of your brain that go into fear, that control anger. And by the way, I want to say something about anger. Anger is not purely a negative emotion, by the way. Anger is actually can be is designed as a boundary setting emotion and can be used very constructively. The problem is that anger is most often used destructively in relationships and in our culture. But in engaging in these practices, one can even bring anger in. I even bring anger into mediation from time to time. I'm not going to blow up at somebody in a mediation. I've never done that, and I won't. But I have a responsibility to control myself. But there are times where I'm feeling enough edge to what's going on that I will let a little bit of that energy out. And if I will only do it if I have first checked in with myself, checked in with what's happening, what's going on for me, why am I feeling this anger? And if I feel like there's a need to set a boundary, I'll let a little bit of the energy out. And it can be very powerful. It's really helped people. It can be in service of helping people to see, hey, wait a minute, I'm stepping over a boundary here. And then the conversation gets more respectful again. So anger is not purely a negative emotion, but yes, the brain is this is the more primitive parts of the brain, and then the more advanced parts of the brain. There's the mammalian was the next layer that developed over evolution, and then the cerebral cortex, the top part of our brain, was the last one, and that developed our ability to have intricate thought, to be able to do physics and come up with the E equals MC squared and language and everything else. So when your lid flips, your cerebral cortex, yes, goes offline. And then you're relying on the more primitive parts of your brain. Now, it doesn't go completely offline. You can still talk sometimes. Actually, people can sometimes lose the power of speech when they get triggered enough. I used to actually, one of my favorite reactions was to go into freeze and to just not talk. But it wasn't, but your cerebral cortex to a large degree goes offline, and you lose a lot of the choice of possibilities of how you can respond to a situation. So slowing things down, getting curious can allow the lids to come back down and bring all of the powers of our brain back online. Okay, I have another question. The question is, I grew up in an environment where my feelings and thoughts were not honored or validated. This bled into a lot of my romantic relationships, and I did not know how to advocate for myself and feel I was easily manipulated a lot of the time. It feels very uncomfortable for me to speak up for myself. Any tips, advice on getting past that feeling of uncomfortability and trusting my feelings and trusting that my experience is valid? Wow, I really appreciate that question. And I want to say I really relate to it. I would say I relate to everything that was said in that question, from my own experience of my family to my own experience in relationships for many years. And the tips that I would bring would be, in addition to starting with the welcoming everything piece, and that means welcoming yourself, really honoring where you are and why you've had these troubles. There were the strategies I developed for being in a relationship may have saved my life when I was 11 and in a highly chaotic family. I needed to try to manage things and not put a lot of effort and time into figuring out what I needed or asking for what I needed. That would only lead to greater hardship. But as an adult, and I carried that into adulthood, those strategies made sense. And it's just that at some point in my life, they stopped making sense. So starting with welcoming, the fact that you had this brilliant strategy that you used as a child to get you through your childhood. Um, and then, yeah, honoring yourself by taking the time to slow down. You know, I recommend practices like meditation, like therapy, having people to talk about how you show up in relationship, and then in your relationships themselves, having the courage to talk about engaging in practices like the ones I've talked about today. And it does mean getting more and more used to being willing to express what your needs are. And it's a practice. You start small and you build on it. And I can almost guarantee you that you will find that as you become more confident and you're right in the rightness of expressing your needs, you will be met with more positive outcomes. And if you're not, frankly, it may be an indication that the relationship you're in might not be the right one. Because you know, as I said in a blog that I wrote about, you know, how do people know when it's time to end a relationship? I think the main way you know that is if you and your partner are on very different growth trajectories. And if you're looking to grow, to become more able to express your needs and to be respected and to be respectful, and your partner is not, and they're not willing to engage in that growth process, it's not a good sign for the relationship. And it may be a sign that it's time that you've grown beyond it. My partner and I, Lori, we were lucky to be on very parallel growth paths. You know, we both came in with a certain amount of immaturity, like everybody does. I think the growing up process happens throughout the lifespan for most people. But we've grown together, and it's been, you know, we hit some parts where we almost broke up. You know, as I said, I told one story about that. There was others where we almost got divorced. But in engaging in these practices with some courage and some vulnerability, we were able to come to a point in our marriage that's very, very satisfying and powerful. I thought there was, it looks like that question was taken away. So I don't see any other questions in there. Are there any other questions about any of the practices or anything that I've said here today? Okay. Well, as I mentioned, thank you very much, Catherine. You know, this stuff, I have to say, this stuff is the real deal. I talk about these practices because I've actually engaged in them, and they've helped change my life, along with some other things. As I mentioned, Lori and I are going to be offering some groups on going deeper with these things. Lori actually is a group leader in authentic relating practices. She has a nonprofit called the Realness Project, where they take these practices into prisons and do 2-day workshop with incarcerated people, men and women. We're going to be working with anybody who wants to deepen their ability to be in relationship. As I also mentioned, our firm, Conscious Family Law and Mediation, works with couples on relationships and does relationship mediations and conscious family contracts, which are conscious, intentional ways of entering into marriage. So if anybody has any further questions or would like any further discussions about any of this or any more information about these offerings, just shoot me an email at the email I put in at the beginning. And yeah, let's see. I'll put my email in there one more time. And I also want to once again thank Catherine and everybody at Hammond Law. for inviting me here to do this. We're very pleased to be able to be on this platform. I'm very, very impressed with your firm, Catherine. The way you guys do business is just exactly what we're trying to do in the world. You're a great example of a wonderful company, and deeply appreciative that you were willing to have me speak on your platform.
I am so deeply appreciative of your willingness to be here and to share all of this. And it highlights for me one of the distinctions about the way that you and John show up in the world, and the way that I and we show up in the world, with vulnerability, not claiming to have all the answers or to do everything perfectly. And I find that's the best place to really be helpful to people, because nobody's got their act fully together anyway. And the minute it's a normal thing with lawyers, right? Lawyers try to act like they have all the answers. And I'll be the first one to say that I don't have all the answers, and I'm still practicing myself. The one thing that really, these were all fabulous. The one that spoke to me the most was on owning my own experience. It's something that I know to do, and it's something I have to be honest and say I have done very little of. And I know it. And so that's the one that I'm claiming for today. I'm really going to focus on sharing what I'm experiencing in the moment, in the conversation, rather than all of the here's what I think you're doing wrong kind of stuff that's so deeply ingrained into us.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how that works for you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. I am positive that it will be a practice. So I did put a link into the chat box. We would love your feedback for everybody who attended. If you're a member of the Legacy Protection Plan, we have our next workshop coming up next month on February 18th, which is a Thursday afternoon also. That is on utilizing DocuBank fully. All of you have certain documents lodged with DocuBank, and most of you don't know all of the ways that it can be used. It's very helpful. And just a preview, we have trustee school coming up. So we are creating a school for you and your successor trustees to really dig into what needs to happen when you're needed, when a successor trustee is needed. So that, I believe, is coming up in April. So if you're not a client of Hammond Law Group and you have any estate planning questions or would like us to check out your documents, we're happy to do that. Just let us know on that form or give us a call, whatever works for you. So, and if anybody is in need of working with somebody to set the context for a successful relationship before a marriage, if you have loved ones who are doing that, Peter and his firm do conscious family agreements that are a beautiful way to do that. And obviously you also do mediation and divorce work as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for all of you who carved out the time to be here. I want to honor you for doing that. And yeah, let us know if we can be of service in any other way. Good to be with you. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Catherine. Night.